I don't know that there's anything more of a community type activity than talking about the opioid crisis. Nationwide, more than 64,000 Americans have died from a drug overdose in 2016 alone, and the numbers seem to be increasing. It's very much an epidemic. The Midwest and the Northeast have had the highest number of deaths related to heroin overdoses, and more than 1,000 people died in Connecticut last year as a result of a drug overdose, many of them related to heroin. And so clearly, it's not only a serious problem, but it's becoming more serious, it seems, especially over the last 5 to 8 years. The numbers have skyrocketed. So I feel that the Civic Engagement Institute and the school, we have an obligation to put such a forum on to bring this to your attention. Now, Professor Schlater has become something of an expert in this opioid crisis. He makes it part of his curriculum in the English courses he teaches. I'll talk a little bit about a book that he assigns called Chasing the Scream that really inspires people to learn more about the topic. And so he will be leading the panel of 3 in a discussion about opioid use and this epidemic. So we have 3 panelists. In the middle is Officer Joanna Blumetti. She is with the Farmington Police Department, has been there for 18 years. She's a in the detective division and is the primary opiate investigator. Sarah Nichols, to Detective Blumetti's right, has been a student at Tunxis. She's going to speak about her personal story of addiction. And nearest to me is Jamali Rios. She is a graduate of Tunxis Community College and is now a drug counselor. So we have a broad array of different perspectives on the panel. And so James is going to be leading the discussion starting now. All right.
So let me just ask one question, and please don't hold back and be honest. How many of you are currently or know somebody who, or have a family member or a friend who has suffered from heroin or opiate addiction? Probably at least half of you. Usually it's even more. Professor Fiera was just mentioning it's an increasing problem. I became first interested in this topic. I used to live in Mexico, actually. My oldest son was born there. He's Mexican. Doesn't look like it, but he is. And I saw firsthand cartels. Not, I think, involved with them, but I saw some of the aftermath of the violence of the cartels, and I became interested in the international drug trade. And so when I came here and I started working at Tunxis, it was a natural move for me to become interested in the drug trade locally. And I would say in the 5 years I've been teaching the drug trade in my Comp 2 classes, it has become, what's the word? It's not only more severe and strong, but just more bizarre. I mean, we started with heroin, now it's fentanyl, and Officer Blumetti and Jamali Rios can speak to this more, but the drugs are getting just stronger, more powerful, more slippery, they're more deadly. So I feel like it's just, I always ask myself, what we're doing is not really working right now. We have a drug epidemic. It's it's getting worse. So I always ask my students, and this is the paper they're going to write right now, is how can we solve this problem? What is a way to look at some solutions to this? And so I think to solve a problem, you sort of define the problem. And so with our panelists, I would like to, have them tell us their story of the drug war, of their local scene, of what they're seeing, what they've experienced. And I think it'll be very illuminating, especially for me and for all of us. I've read a lot of books, and I've spoken with plenty of people, but this is a rare opportunity to really get some experts on this. So I'd actually like to start with you, Sarah. Sort of the egg or the chicken, how did it start? But how about your experience, with addiction? How did you get started? what's your story with addiction?
Okay, hi, I'm Sarah, and I did not prepare any notes, but just a little bit about my life. I'm a recovering addict. I'm a recovering opioid addict. I have a little over 5 years clean, and I started abusing prescription pain medication in 2002. I was treated for migraine, and I don't think that I ever used what I was prescribed I did not follow the directions, I don't think, ever. Or if I did, it was a very weak attempt. And I always told myself during, my active use was from 2002 to 2012. And in all that time, I always said to myself, I'm not an addict because I'm getting this from the doctor, it's legal, I'm not going to the street, I had a whole list of things that I didn't do, so therefore I was not an addict. And so that went on for a while, and it was not a thing. If I ran out of my prescription, I was not immediately back at my doctor asking for more. I always said I'm not looking for drugs. But then in 2012, actually 2011, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which, if you don't know, it's a chronic illness. It can be very painful. And the doctor that was treating me at that time, I was really lobbying for something more potent than what I was being given to manage that pain. And again, I said, I'm not looking for drugs. And so I got a referral to a local pain treatment center, and I got what I wanted. I had I was given a choice, and then in 2012, I had another injury which exacerbated all the other pain that I had, and so I ended up, my drug of choice for a long time was Percocet, and then that summer, the beginning of June 2012, I was prescribed methadone for pain, and many of you may know about methadone as a treatment to get off of heroin, but it is also used for pain management, and it comes in pill form. And again, I was instructed on how to use it, and that went completely out the window for me. That summer of 2012, my use escalated. I suffered withdrawal sickness for the first time. That had never been an issue. When I was taking pain medication, with Percocet, that was not really an issue with me. I went through that many times into the summer, into early fall of 2012, and then right around November of that year, I had planned to go to my doctor and say, look, I want a higher dose, or I want something stronger. And this was really kind of where it ended for me. I had gone through withdrawal sickness again, and I was at the doctor. I was prepared to lie to them again, to say this is what I want. And they asked me, well, when was the last time you had it? And I couldn't remember. I didn't have an answer for them. And it was really a realization of I can't do this anymore, because I was getting really close to, say, crushing up my drugs and snorting them. That was the next step. I just couldn't do it anymore. So I went through that process, and recovery isn't just, it's like you don't stop and say, oh, I'm recovered, because I think it is an illness, and you have to be vigilant in how you live your life. And currently, and for the past 5 years, I do work a program of recovery. It's a 12-step program, and it's not a disease that can be fought alone. If you think, yeah, I can get clean, I'll be okay, I'll go back to like whatever I was doing in my using life, you're probably going to end up using again. That's my feeling. Unfortunately, I've known too many people who have died. You know, people that just, they went too soon. And seeing so many people raise their hands in this room, in terms of like how this has touched your life, I mean, this is insane, it's wrong. And, I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I mean, there's more than just my story, but I think that's probably it for now. Thank you.
Can I just have one follow-up question? This just gets to like the nature of addiction, which is I know it's a concern of yours. It's how do you think you would have gone that path without the original prescription? In other words, were you a candidate for addiction even without that? Would you have found something, or was it just the medical prompt that sort of set you off?
I think that there's been a whole, I won't go into the story of my life, but there's been like there's been abuse, there's been trauma. There really has never been a time where I wasn't trying to self-medicate with something, whether it was food, whether it was compulsive shopping, and then finally in the end, it was drugs. So I think that there were always kind of addictive tendencies. I think that there's just there's a stigma, I think, still of people thinking, oh, people want this life. And no one that I know has woken up and said, yeah, I'd really like to be a junkie. That's, I don't know. And for so long, I rationalized and said, I'm not an addict. Because it seemed all above board to me. And, just because it's legal does not mean that it can't be abused in some way.
And were the doctors complicit? Were they, whenever you asked for more, they were complicit?
I don't know, and these were reputable people, because it would just be like, I would run out, but I would not be immediately back in their office looking for more.
Right.
It was definitely a very under the radar kind of behavior. I mean, it's definitely addict behavior.
It's sneaky behavior.
Yeah, it's very sneaky. It's like I did some really shady stuff. When I was active and saying, I'm not looking for drugs, when your brain is really operating on the opposite tack of, yes, this is what you want. And then, after, I did not go to rehab after I stopped. They used to have, I don't know if they still do, but in Bristol, where I live, they used to have a Suboxone program, and I called up my doctor, my psychiatrist, to tell him, look, I'm finally coming to the realization of I can't do this safely. And they asked me if I wanted to come into the Suboxone program to help get off the drugs. And it was like this pinball machine in my brain lit up. Like, yes, that's another drug, it's another opioid, I want that. And I decided not to go that route, because that is a very difficult drug to get off of. So I went through the whole process. I just went through it like cold turkey, and that was very unpleasant, but it didn't kill me, so
I'll go back.
So, I'm not sure. I lost my train of thought, but, I think it's important to say, this is happening. This is real. People need to hear these stories.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll move on, but I want to come back to you in a little while. There's a few more follow-up questions. So Jamali Rios, so somebody like Sarah comes in to you and needs some help. A couple questions I have for you is, how do you get somebody through And how do you get somebody through that's not going to go back? Because we know that, return rates to getting help are high. So how do you handle somebody like that? What's the best way to get somebody clean once they're truly addicted?
Okay, so that's a lot of unpack here. So to begin, it depends on what substance the person is trying to recover. In this case, we will use opiate because that's why we're here. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other. I mean, I've had clients that just simple cognitive behavioral therapy would be the ideal approach, and it would work. However, we need to see how motivated the client really is. There's so many components that I can't just give you one straight answer due to the fact that everyone is an individual and they experience addiction in their own way. And many different things drive them to do these specific drugs. I've had clients who are judges. I've had clients who are nurses. I've had clients who are people you would never think abuse drugs. And not everything works. Not everything that I've tried with one client works for the other.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, there's no straightforward answer. However, the one thing that I know for sure will in fact help once they've gotten the drugs out of their system is in fact that they seek some type of therapy. There's always a treatment plan, and it should be individual treatment plan. Not lately we've had this broad generalization of addiction, which I'm not fond of. However, we can't treat everyone the same. Some people have had traumatic experiences, therefore wanted to self-medicate. Others have had back surgery, which once the doctor has, picked up on their addiction, they kind of hand them an NA pamphlet and, carry on your merry way. Recently, though, the approach, thank God here in Connecticut, has been that once it's been established that this person is abusing any type of prescription drugs, they intervene, they have an intervention. And most of the time you would get a good one if the insurance is right. I'm sorry to say, but this is what it is. If the insurance is willing to pay, then yeah, you'll get the best treatment. But if 9 times out of 10, the person is under some type of state insurance, the help is minimum to none. So.
Do you find that most heroin addicts start with pills, or is
No.
it no?
No.
So what's that defining? What, pills for some, needles for other?
So recently, the last couple clients I've had have been, actually the majority have been, they've started with prescription drugs, and then once they wouldn't be able to doctor shop, because now we're more aware of that, we've had people steal the paper prescriptions from their doctor's offices, and they'll write some and they'll go to jail for it. But some of them are more or less, it depends. Socially, the way we treat people once we find out that their addiction is kind of gets them deeper into that addiction. Once we treat them differently, that's it. That's some of the breaking point for many, actually driving them to fall deeper into the category of being a junkie, as society calls it. I call it someone who's suffering from a very severe case of agony.
Wait, hold on a second. Let me just see if I can understand. So you're saying the initial treatment is their addiction deepens before it?
Absolutely, yes.
Wow, so they use more at the beginning of getting help?
When they're trying. A lot of the people that are ambivalent, meaning some of them won't want to see addiction for what it is, which who would want to? Society describes it as this it makes you a horrible person. Who would want to describe, hey, I'm an addict, therefore treat me as such? That's the reality of it.
Makes them feel worse.
Absolutely.
Right.
So once we change our views and how we treat an addict as a society itself, I believe we can do the healing together. There's multiple things, as I stated earlier, that's not going to work for everyone. But the support, however, going back to the using of it, yes, street drugs are insane. Insane. if they're insane. You never know what you're actually gonna get. However, I've seen for the most part within the last 3 years that prescription drugs has been that initial problem that we get, and then they turn into street drugs. Therefore, street drugs are actually horrible because you never know what you're gonna get. So, yeah.
All right, how about Detective Lumetti? I'm gonna come back to you as well, Jamali. 18 years, so what have you seen, what's changed in those 18 years from how where the drugs come from, what the drugs are, the kinds of people who use the drugs? I mean, what are the changes you've been seeing?
So, I was a patrol officer when I started, so I was out there and I would respond to sort of a medical call. Mom says her son's unresponsive. And I would get there and mom, we'd ask, hey, does he use drugs? No, my kid absolutely doesn't have the denial, right? No, my kid, and they've at times sadly hidden it. We were coming, so they would hide it, throw it away or whatever, but is this possible drug related? No. And my professional experience with it, I'll even say 15 years ago in the town of Farmington, that's what I can sort of speak of, which is an affluent town, right? And it would be a 19 or 20-ish sort of kid abusing heroin, shooting up, snorting it or whatever, and it would be an overdose. And the change that I've seen now, and again, this isn't don't think like that's what all my cases were then, and now all of them are this, but that was what I felt like. It was a young person, whether you want to call it experimental drug use, but it probably started young and they sort of transitioned into heavier drugs. Then we started seeing that it was maybe an injury or maybe just choosing to use pills, pain pills. But again, oftentimes an injury, it's an adult now. Now what we're seeing is we've gone to overdoses in the town of Farmington for a 56-year-old male, 60-year-old female. Those are the ones that we say, wow, where is this coming from? This isn't a young person who is making a foolish life choice. And I get that, even at my age, and we still make foolish choices as we age, but you expect that sort of to age out of some of that stuff. So that's the change we're seeing, is our users aren't these young, foolish kids, but now they're sort of all ages, people that are in their 50s, 60s, and you would think they would know better, but typically maybe there was an injury, and a legitimate doctor started prescribing them a medication. Like Sarah said, from day one, you didn't start using it the way it was prescribed. And we find that maybe it says take 1 or 2 as needed, and they're taking 10 a day,
Right.
So that's kind of a trend that I've seen. And for us, and enforcement-wise, I feel like there's somewhat of a change. I mean, I was, at the beginning when I was introduced, I am the opiate investigator, right? Well, truthfully, there's 3 detectives in the town of Farmington, and we all investigate them. But I got the blessing to be sort of the investigator for them. And that's sort of a new trend, is the state told us, our geographical area, our court system said, you will identify a detective who is responsible for investigating all of these cases because they're becoming, such a problem. Years ago, it was the patrol officers who probably would have handled most of these cases. But now we've got collaboration on the local, state, and federal level where there's sort of mandates coming down to us as to how we're going to investigate these. And the change is, if we get, first of all, by a public act, years ago, we were told that if somebody calls 911 and asks for help because their child or their family member has overdosed, we can't go in there, treat them, ship them to the hospital, and then arrest them later for the drugs we found. Okay, that was one of the things that happened, is this public act that said if somebody reaches out and calls 911, now you can't turn around and penalize them for reaching out for help. So that's a huge change, because years ago that is probably what happened. We'd get on scene, we'd ship them to the hospital, and then we'd say, hey, by the way, Mom, when your son gets out of the hospital, let him know there's going to be a warrant for possession or whatever. So that's a bit of a change on the enforcement aspect of it. And now I think, I can't speak for the judicial piece, but I don't think at the times where we do end up arresting, a lot of times we'll go to a larceny at the mall. We have West Farms Mall. And I'd say, maybe not 9 times out of 10, but a lot of times when we're arresting this person for stealing underwear and bras and pants and whatever, we find that they have drugs on them. In those cases, they are going to get arrested for the possession of the drugs. You know, people might, and I'm open to discussion, people might say that's unfair, these are, you know, victims, they have an illness. But the patrol officer who's there is just, you know, doing what they're supposed to do and enforcing the law. When they go to court, those people aren't gonna end up in jail. They're not going to prison because they had a small amount of heroin on them. Oftentimes the courts are saying, especially if the person raises their hand and says, I have a problem, often the courts are saying, okay, let's not sort of criminalize this, but let's send them to rehab, let's help them get resources. So that's a big change, I think, you know. And then the change in drugs. You know, you spoke briefly about fentanyl, and I just learned something. I learned stuff new every day on the job. I don't sit here and pretend to be an expert. But one of the things that almost knocked me over was, you know, you hear of people who use heroin, and then we start hearing about fentanyl, and you think, oh, these poor users who are getting it laced with fentanyl, and that's what's killing them. And it was actually the medical examiner investigator. We had an overdose, and she came out, and she was teaching us a lot about these common trends, like themes she sees about prescription drugs that these heroin users seek out. Anyway, she told me now there are people who are seeking fentanyl. They're actually seeking the fentanyl purposely, and no joke. I mean, she just about had to pick me up off the floor because, as a person who doesn't use drugs, you know, I'm watching the same news that you guys are watching, and they're saying it's deadly. We even have protocols of how we're to handle it as patrol officers and detectives. You know, don't touch it, don't inhale it. Most of the time we're not even testing it. We're sending to the lab to test it, let them risk their lives, right? Let's not risk our lives. But yet now we're hearing there's people that are seeking fentanyl. And then there's all the derivatives of fentanyl, right? Carfentanil, you know, I couldn't even begin to list them all. But so that's what we're seeing is, and I don't know if Sarah can, it sort of spoke to this or even relate to it, but they kind of they're using heroin, and at some point it becomes not enough. And then they're seeking sort of that next, the effects actually wear off, or they don't feel the effects, so they need that next step. And I think that's where we're seeing this fentanyl and such. So obviously it's dangerous to the users, but we as officers are getting a lot of training on careful when you're on these scenes because it can be deadly. Simply touching it could sort of get in our system, and we end up hitting the floor, becoming the next victim. So.
Kamali, what are you seeing for new drugs? It's getting weirder and weirder, I know. So
I will tell you one of the things. Again, this is a social problem, and I hate to say this because I do, but I'm pretty sure it's one of the reasons you actually brought me on the panel. The reason we're actually seeing this be such a huge crisis that everyone is talking about is because it hit a different social class. That's just the bottom line. And not to say in a bad light, if anything, I'm actually grateful that now we have such a broader audience. And it has nothing to do with race. I'm just saying social class in general, people that are, you know, affluent or are educated. And they actually know how laws and policymakers work. So they would call their senators, so they're actually doing something about it, which I am actually very grateful for. But what I do see with the drugs, it is a social thing. We see it in music, you know, a lot of the music is socially acceptable. And when you hear somebody as popular as like a Miley Cyrus or I forgot one of the newer rappers' names, like 21 Savage. You know, this is the music that we're listening to, and they're talking about popping Molly's, Percocets. We're talking about Xanax. We see a lot of the overdoses happening right now in real time with a lot of the entertainers because this is the trend. And if we make it so much more socially acceptable, then we have, I believe, we're going to have a bigger problem moving forward than we do right now. So most of the drugs that we do see is Molly's for sure, and that's a cocktail of garbage. It's just it's what it is. The fentanyl, we see a lot of actually fake Percocets being sold right now. People really think they're getting a Percocet and they don't even know what they're buying anymore. So these are scary, scary times. And the drugs right now, the most is in fact heroin because it's harder to get I'm sorry, I need to say this. A lot of this attention we're getting, we have pharmaceutical companies now that are actually under a lot of scrutiny. They were sending to small towns of like 15,000 people, or even 1,500 people, where they have these little private practices. They were sending over 2 to 3 million Percocets. This is all being investigated in real time. So again, the marketing behind these pharmaceutical companies, it's huge. It's a huge problem. But again, the more attention we bring to this and all the components that play a part in this crisis we have in our hands, the better we're all going to be able to deal with it as a community and society.
But even if we were to shut down what you're talking about with the pharmaceutical companies and somebody like Sarah didn't get hooked, is the cat out of the bag already? I mean, is it too late? Is it, if we shut it all down, there's already so much heroin, fentanyl, everything else in there, or can we?
Never.
I mean,
never. We've been battling this forever. I mean, drugs has always been a part. It's just that now, as I said, it's a bigger problem because now people are more aware of it, and the fact that it hit a higher social class. Because if you look back in the 80s when the crack epidemic took place, I mean, we did a lot to prevent it. I mean, from the FBI, CIA, I mean, cargo ships being seized, but it never really stopped anything because crack is still around.
it is.
So having said that, again, public awareness is amazing, but when we all collectively decide to play a role in it, whether it be not to treat someone like crap when they're asking for help, not make them feel different when they say, hey, I'm an addict, you know, and I'm not saying condone the behavior either. I'm saying probably play a role and do your best as civic duty, which would be get them help them understand that they need to get someone to speak to. So.
Detective Blumetti, just picking up on that as far as the, affluent neighborhood, Farmington money. So do you sense pressure? Do you feel pressure to treat these people in a different way? Maybe as the idea if they get busted for possession, are they going to be going to rehab? Are they going to be going to prison? I mean, what kind of?
That choice is not my choice.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if I'm, stopping a car and pulling over somebody who lives in Bristol versus somebody who's local. If they're in possession of an illegal substance, we are going to treat them the same way. And again, it might be an unpopular approach, but I can tell you I've stopped somebody speeding through town and they said they were headed to Bristol to head to the Suboxone or the methadone clinic or wherever they were headed, and it's not fair, you need to let me go right now because it's only open till 8, and if you don't let me go right now, then I'm going to miss it, and it's all your fault. I'll never forget that one. It's all my fault if they don't make it. Well, you're going 84 miles per hour on Route 6 because you're late. You know what I mean? I didn't make you late. And I have compassion. Don't misunderstand me. But in the same token, if going 84 miles per hour, you end up killing somebody down the road, now I've not done my job. But to answer your question, I don't treat them differently. It's based on sort of the circumstances and what they're in possession of. And it has to do with the quantity of what they're, in possession of. We very clearly, as officers, if we stop somebody and they have 52 packaged, little bundles of heroin, and they're not using that themselves. I've most likely got a dealer with me instead of somebody who's using. But again, no, it doesn't matter where they're from or what they look like. The enforcement should be equal, nonetheless. And Jamali and Sarah and I were kind of starting to talk before this started, and I just have to say, I've only been a police officer for 18 years, but I've seen drugs in Farmington as long as I've been an officer here. The overdoses, and it sort of ebbed and flowed. And again, at the time, I felt like our victims were late teens, early 20-somethings, using drugs. But nonetheless, drugs have been in Farmington as long as I've been an officer here. Yes, there's more deaths. There's more deaths in Connecticut. There's more deaths across the country. I'm not questioning that, but that's why I feel like the attention is sort of on this now, is the number of deaths versus who's dying. I'd like to think that it doesn't have to do with who's dying, but that there's just that many more deaths.
I wonder how many. I'm sure you don't know the specific answer, but how many addicts would you say there are in relation to who actually overdoses? In other words, do you have more people who use who don't overdose? Because that's what, you're right, we always hear about the overdoses, but we don't hear about the 95% more who are actually living miserable lives of addiction.
Right.
Do you have any feel
I
for
would be
that?
totally guessing if I started saying,
Right.
you know what I mean? I don't know. But if you looked at our arrest records, we are definitely arresting a ton more people for possession versus when compared to the number of overdoses we have, you know? So, yeah, there's a lot of people out there using and not overdosing, you know? So our possession arrests are through the roof.
More than 18 years ago? Or?
Again, I'd be speculating. I wouldn't even want to sort of guess at that. No. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, it's interesting. We don't think of Farmington as a drug
everywhere.
zone, but it's everywhere.
And I think that's what we're seeing, right? That's why, I mean, we're seeing it in the news. That's what's happening, is it's everywhere.
Yeah.
We're not, this isn't just an inner city kind of issue.
No. So let me come back to you real quick. So you said you were able to get off the pills in 2012.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, and I know John can speak to this next, but so many people relapse. You know, is there something? Was it just willpower that you didn't relapse? I mean, I think relapse rates are like, you can correct me, it's more than 98%, 96% or something. You know, so you're one of the 2 or 4%, Sarah. How is it? Friends? Is it just willpower? Is it, you know, tied yourself to lock yourself in a room for a year so you stay clean? I mean, how did you stay clean?
You know, it's like, how did I stay clean? How do I stay clean now? I think if I had been left to myself, if I had said, you know, I'm all right, you know, I don't need any help, I think I would have relapsed. And there have been times over the years where I've thought about, you know, where I have thought about using. I think because it was like, I knew about the kind of recovery that I pursue, and I'm definitely not saying that working a 12-step program is for everyone, because I don't think that it is. It's like I had seen that work in other people's lives, and I knew people who were in recovery, and I reached out to them and I said, look, it's like, this is what's really going on with me, because for so many times I said I have this under control when it was the exact opposite. And that's how I stayed clean. You know, it was a long process. I mean, nobody told me that like within the first few weeks that I would miss my drug, because it was really kind of like my best friend at that point at the end. I mean, addiction is an incredibly isolating disease. You know, it really took a lot of kind of readjusting my attitude to a lot of stuff. I don't think I could do it on sheer willpower. If you can, I applaud you, but I don't think that was my case at all. It was really more of like, I know that this is a process that works. I've seen it work, and I know that this is out there. And, you know, that's how I've done it.
Do you still have urges and have to fight it? Do you still consider yourself an addict even though you don't use
I still think of myself as an addict because, you know, as we were talking before we started, I had to be hospitalized for something in November, and I had to have pain medication. And it had been about it was right before, like, the anniversary of, getting clean. And it was just like, my brain still likes it. And I really unfortunately, they did not send me home with a prescription for anything. And really kind of hearing these messages of, you miss this. You really miss it. And saying, no, I don't. Because it's just like, it's going to take me down a road where ultimately it's going to kill me. And I don't really think I want to die. It's like I've seen what this stuff does to people, and I saw what it did to me, and that's not what I want to go back to. It's like I have a life today. It's not just surviving. by the end, I was really like looking over and seeing like this abyss of saying, okay, you know, you're edging a little closer to the next step. And, you know, fortunately, I don't have to like think that way today.
It's interesting what you were saying, Detective Blumetti, about they now seek out fentanyl, which they must know in advance is deadly. So you were saying, Sarah, that you pulled back from the abyss, but somebody who's seeking out fentanyl, is that somebody who wants the abyss in that case? I mean, is that a sort of indirect, I'm just pontificating, but a sort of indirect suicide attempt? I don't know. I mean, if you're doing that, then what is that?
I don't really know. I mean, I had known about how fentanyl is being used. It's like being pressed into pills to make it look like a Percocet. And I know that, you know, fentanyl it's at least 10 times more potent than heroin. So I don't really know what to say about people who are seeking out the fentanyl. It's just, I don't know, it's like you reach a tolerance and it's like, okay, what's the next thing that's going to keep me or even take me further for a high?
Wow.
And I think that they see the people around them, so what do? They surround themselves with people who use typically, right?
Right.
And they see that those are examples of people that are using and they haven't died. So to say is it a suicide attempt, think of this generation in smoking cigarettes, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're the generation who has heard, there's a high likelihood you smoke cigarettes, right? It's going to kill you,
Mm-hmm.
right? But say my mom's generation weren't getting those messages kind of thing. But even with this message, they're still choosing to smoke cigarettes because they might be the exception. We can all point to the exception, right? So again, they surround themselves with people who are also seeking fentanyl and drugs and using, and they go, it's a gamble, but they kind of have this, I don't know if it's denial, it won't be me, it's not going to be me. And I did go to a training, which I don't even think I can describe this as well as it was described, but sort of when somebody like adds, whether they're adding fentanyl to some heroin or it's fentanyl in itself, and they are pressing pills, if they make 100 pills out of that, they don't all have the equal amount of fentanyl in them, right?
Right.
One pill might have 1%, well, another pill might have 99%, but you don't know which pill you're getting.
Wow.
And when they kind of did this description to me, I thought, oh my God, so it is a gamble every time, and maybe half or more of those pills you can take and there's that right amount or lesser amount, you don't die, but there's going to be pills that are the majority of it is fentanyl, and those are the ones that are probably dying. I just found that very interesting that they don't know what they're taking.
Mystery drug.
It's a risk, and a risk that they're willing to take.
But they're also, and there's another perspective of this. Think of it as a thrill seeker, someone that skydives, someone that just wants to get that euphoria going. They'll jump from 10,000 feet. They're like, that jump wasn't all that great. Let's go higher, 20,000 feet. Does that make sense? So it just keeps increasing. You're looking for that first time a feeling occurred. That first time that made you fall in love with what that was. And therefore, as you were literally, Joanna was just describing, was that you never really know what you're getting. You truly don't. So maybe it takes you 4 bags to get the high that you're seeking from Joe's drug, but here comes Mary with new drugs. So you're used to the 4 bags. You're gonna do those 4 bags and you're dead. You're gonna overdose.
Is that part of the attraction, the mystery, or is it?
Absolutely, thrill seeking.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, we all, at some times without moderation, if there's something that we enjoy, we're gonna do it to the max. It doesn't matter if it's, as Sarah said earlier, it doesn't matter if it's eating, shopping, gambling, sex. It doesn't matter. If you enjoy it and it releases those endorphins, you are definitely gonna seek it more and more and more.
Well, just to get back to the earlier question, why do we have a 98, 96, whatever the figure is, relapse rate? Why does everybody get clean? It's not in their system, so they don't have cravings for the actual drug, and yet they're coming back in massive numbers.
Okay, so we've seen an increase lately, and it all reverts back to the allocation of the funds being set down. Having said that, detox previously used to be 7 to 10 days. Detox now it's 3 to 4 days. And then, as I said, they send someone who's literally just getting all these foreign chemicals out of their body. For 4 days, they were kept. And it's finally just starting to get out, and that's the day you leave. You know, and they're hoping that you could actually go to that NA meeting, and they tell you, hey, do 30 and 30, or we suggest many things. However, the short amount of time definitely relapse, and they say it's part of recovery, which in fact it is, but it's not a requirement. It does always happen to the most, to the people that don't have support, the network. They don't have, you know, someone to talk to about how they're feeling. That's why they tell you to go get a sponsor. That's why they tell you to, you know, talk to friends. And again, as I keep saying, it's a social thing. So if your friend is reaching out and calling you at 2 a.m, you know, hey, I'm kind of jonesing. Can you stay on the phone with me real quick? And I know you have to go to work tomorrow. Probably do that. Probably take the 10 minutes to get them back to where, at a point where they're comfortable enough in their own skin and confident that, you know, they can do this because they have that friend that's willing to pick up the phone at 2, 3 in the morning just to hear you say, hey, I want to get high, but I really don't. Obviously, they really don't. They're reaching out. So the reason there's relapse often is because there's not much once you leave the detox that, you know, that's in place. We do have outpatient, but again, it goes back to insurance. What are they willing to cover? Who's around? Who's involved in your recovery? There's a lot of components to that.
Yeah, that's everything. Addicts are often, it's a lonely job. So if you're a junkie or an addict, then maybe you don't have that network anymore, or maybe your network is other addicts.
Yep.
So, you know, in 4 days is not much. So, you know, what about, is it just lost cases for those, and lost hope for them, or what? I mean, we're talking a lot of people who live like that. So what, you know, how about that situation? Because the person's been using a while, they give everything to get the drug, right? They don't have they don't have health insurance anymore. So, you know, what about those people? I'm sure you see those a lot.
Well, luckily enough, we live in the state of Connecticut, and I can't like not stress that because I've seen how it affects people when I lived in Milwaukee, and Chicago is horrible for the drug use, and they actually never really got insurance. Here in Connecticut, if you are someone picks up on the street, you know, that either overdosed or passed out, whatever the case was, they bring you to the hospital. Once the social worker at the hospital sends you into a detox, because most likely it's what they would do, the state of Connecticut picks up that tab. They'll grant you the insurance in order to pay for the.
Wow.
So yeah, luckily for us, and again, one of the things that I do want to say is there's been a lot of good change, a lot, and we're still learning. As you know, Joanna had mentioned, there's a lot. I mean, now officers could actually administer Narcan, which could save a life. It does. It saves the person's life. However, we're still learning on how to work once they get out of that, because
It's temporary. It's sort of like a quick fix. You know, we get there if the family does give us information that they've likely overdosed. We have officers that are administering Narcan. We've only been carrying it. Every officer on the road has, I believe, 2 units of Narcan, and they will administer it. But it's not okay, you're all set. Like, we brought you back, so see you tomorrow. They need to be rapidly transported to a medical facility because the effects are short-lived. You know, it kind of, if it works, it brings them back. But officers have been on scene, and they see that they then very quickly, within minutes, they can start sort of losing consciousness, or however you want to describe it again. So they've administered a second dose, but again, they need to get to the hospital and get treatment. And Jamali was funny. She said, well, what are your officers doing? And they're just praying that the medical personnel get on scene, you know, and take over, because now if we run out of our 2 doses, and our response to these calls, truthfully, there's usually going to be at least 2 officers going to these kind of calls, because when they do when you do administer Narcan, they often come awake very violent and aggressive. You know, not even knowingly, not purposely, but you know, you want to at least have a couple guys. I had a call where I was at the time the mom's just screaming her son's on the ground. I didn't even administer Narcan, but I kind of got over him. I must be honest, I thought he was dead, so I kind of was closer than I probably should have been. And this kid just came right up in my face, like ready to roll. And you know, it comes down shortly after that. But when they come, you know, out of this sort of thing, they're very aggressive. They can be very aggressive and violent. So we got to be ready to sort of deal with that situation.
Because we think of like people on heroin. Like, you
Yeah,
know,
Well, the Narcan automatic, like literally as soon as it's administered, it makes you completely sick. It's
drug.
like you never did the drug, period. So it like makes you Jones and you're really angry, like why didn't you, you know, it's crazy. So that's why I had asked her, like, I understand you guys, so what's the protocol after? Like, do you handcuff them? Because they get very violent.
Wow.
Yeah, so I just wanted to learn a little bit more about that because we're still learning about it.
Yeah. I think in the interest of time, because I could personally ask questions for much longer, but I wanted to open it up to anybody in the crowd. If you guys have a question, yes, over here.
First of all, Sarah, thanks for sharing your story. Another question for the detective. I went through similar training that you were talking about where they discussed the pill making, because they're not professional pill makers.
Correct.
The question is there anything that police departments, and not just yours, but in general, are doing to, instead of just arrest the offender, which is, or the addict, or whoever is in possession, to go after the suppliers that are making those pills? Or providing those pills?
Most definitely, especially, you know, with the overdose cases. That's why, you know, we're identifying specific investigators and now there's protocols. We are aggressively now going after the drug dealers. And this day and age with technology, cell phones have been invaluable. You know, they're saying to us, get on scene, and especially of the victim, get their phone. And if they survive, now we want consent. A lot of them are not cooperative at this point because if they're not ready, if they don't see a problem, they're not ready to quit. They're certainly not going to want to, you know, hand us their drug dealer. But if they're deceased, we will seize the phone. If necessary, we do search warrants. And again, that's that collaboration with the local, state, and federal. You know, like we might handle it in Farmington. However, we might, for whatever reasons, the DEA might step in and handle it. But nonetheless, we're getting a lot of information off of these phones. And yeah, we're going after the drug dealers. And they're being charged with the death of these people. And we've had cases in Farmington where it has been the family members who are being charged for delivering the drugs to them. But most times it's not. It's a legit drug. You know, and based on text messages, phone calls, you know, we determine time of death, and we see a text 15 minutes before they were found dead from, you know, and of course a lot of it, the hard part is identifying the person, which we can do, you know, through search warrants and phone records, because they have a nickname on the phone, so it's not like it says Joanna Blumetti. Hi, it doesn't say drug dealer Joanna Blumetti, as nice as that would be for all of us, right? But a lot of these drug dealers as well are savvy enough to have what we call like drop phones or fake phones, or phones they just use, you know, they buy it in Walmart, use it for a week to do their dealings and then drop it. So there's obstacles, but the easy answer to your thing is yes.
That was my next question. Do you go all the way up to charge the dealer with the murder of the victim?
Yes. Yes, if we can get probable cause, you know, we need evidence. It can't, you know, but if we can, if we determine there's probable cause, absolutely, it's happened, and it's more aggressively happening than I've ever seen it before.
Anybody else? Yes.
From like a social or political standpoint, are there any models on like a national, global level that we've seen addressing the similar issue that we can maybe like replicate or that seem to work?
Are you asking me the question?
Anybody?
Okay, so from a political point, I can say that everything is kind of political. You know, again, I keep stating on how right now, being that we have so much attention to the opioid crisis, which is a real crisis, we've seen that a lot of money is being allocated to treatment. We've tried models, again, of cognitive behavioral therapy, which in regards to the addiction piece works. it's just time consuming, you know, and for a lot of people, they want a quick fix. They don't want someone to get well in a year. They want them to get well in 3 weeks because it costs less. So is there any model? Yes. Are the funds readily available? Absolutely not. No.
Yes, right here. Yeah, you were trying to.
I have 3 questions, so bear with me. I promise they're really good. So for all 3 of you, but specifically the detective, what's your opinion about the 10 countries who have successfully handled the drug abuse crisis through decriminalization, legislation, and rehab facilities as treatment instead of locking people up?
Well, so one of my main goals of coming here today is that, like, I'll give you my professional opinions, not my personal opinions necessarily. And I'd be lying to you if I sat here and listed those 10 countries who have done that. I don't know who they are.
No, I got it right here. It's okay.
But with decriminalization, so, you know, this goes across, you know, marijuana, you know, and everything. Like, I've gotten to see that trend. We've seen that there's states that it's legal. It's not legal, by the way, in the state of Connecticut yet, although people want to argue that it is with me. You're usually about 16 years old, and they're like, this is fine. No, it's not. So, I mean, I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, I've seen decriminalization, and there's many arguments as to, you know, by doing that, you take away some of the illicit, you know, the illicit sales or what have you. I couldn't even begin to tell you if I think it's working. I mean, part of me wants to say it's too soon, I guess, to tell. In the state of Connecticut, I haven't seen that. I mean, maybe if we lived in Colorado, I could give you more insight because, you know, they've been legal much longer.
Yeah.
So I know I'm not really answering your question, but
I just want to like put it out there. Like,
Yeah.
Hey, I don't know.
right. And again, that's why, I mean, I'm probably the least popular person here on this panel because I am sort of the representation of the bad guy, you know,
no.
when...
No,
We're
you're
on the
doing your
same
job.
team. Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
we're on the
and I
same
appreciate the reinforcement, but you know, for now, that's what we're doing as officers. You know, we're kind of following the trend, the decriminalization trend, but until it's legal, we do have to take enforcement. You know, that's the downside. So, you know, great. If they call 911 and seek assistance, then we're not walking in and taking enforcement. But that person, again, at the mall who's committing a larceny and they're in possession of it, yeah, we're going for the drug dealers, but we still, for now, you know, I took an oath, I've got to take enforcement on that until, so I guess Governor Malloy tells me I'm not to.
Being prior military police, I understand where you're coming from. Being a former cocaine user, I understand where you're coming from. Studying psychology for probably the past 10 years, totally understand where you're coming from. So my next question for the recoverer, you said a word that I use myself, self-medicating, as a term to describe the reason for usage. Often I think people aren't ready to face the trauma creating the characteristic self-destructive facet of their personality. What would you suggest that someone would have said to you, struggling before you headed down the path of using drugs in isolation?
That's a really great question. I've been in therapy forever. And I think, you know, before I actually got to abusing drugs, before like what I was say, self-medicating with food or compulsively shopping, I think, you know, if anybody had asked me at any point during that time and said, you know, do you think that you're an addict in some way, I probably would have said no, because it's just like, no, you know, this is all like, just no, because, you know, in my own mind, it's like I have this thing of like, oh yeah, you know, you have this thing of like how an addict is supposed to be, or whatever, and just, I was in denial for many, many years of what I was doing, and I think, you know, it was only of just, I don't know what I wish someone had said to me. I think it was, you know, I'm duly diagnosed. I also live with major depressive disorder, and for so long that was the only thing that was being treated. You know, it's only been within the past, you know, 5+ years that it's like, okay, yes, the addiction part was also there. And, you know, is if someone had said to me, you have to stop, I mean, I don't think that would have made a difference.
No, it's too harsh. It's pharmaceutical medications simply replace the same things that people use on the street to get the same high in the same places with their brain. So it's like a medical grade. So I think if people say, yeah, I think you need to see CBT, cognitive behavioral, I think you should go talk to someone. Maybe, do you think that would have worked if someone said, hey, I care about you, I've just noticed these patterns of behavior. Do you think, do you know what I'm saying? 'Cause
I think that, it probably would have, but for so long I said, I have all of this under control, and people want to be reassured with that, because it's just like, addiction is so ugly. They don't want to think, oh my God, you're doing, this and this and this. And it's just like, there's a whole lot of shame involved too.
right.
Of thinking, no, I'm not, there's no way I could be an addict, because at least in my case, it's just like I was getting it from the doctor. And because it's like, when I told my mother, for example, yes, I am an addict, first words out of her mouth are, no, you're not. She's like, you're not an addict. And I was just trying to say, it's like, oh, yes, I am. And she doesn't know all of it, but it's like, she didn't want to see it. And I mean, I can't blame her for wanting to say it. It's like, if the roles were reversed, and if she came to me and said, yes, I'm an addict, I'd be like, no, you're not. But again, I don't know what someone could have said to me all that time to say, look, you're really, because I was already kind of self-destructive without the rest of it. So I don't know, it played out the way it played out.
Thank you very much. Last question. So now that we've discussed labels help people wrap their minds around something complex, akin to generalizations. That doesn't make it correct or right. But with that being said, what are positive terms besides junkie, addict, crack whore, user, pothead, and the myriad of other ones that we can use in conversation, like a forum like this, or a public in general, about a certain topic or aspect of a person's life, because we are not one aspect of ourselves. So what would you say, what do you use in therapy? Or like what terms do you use, or labels, or?
I mean, these are just, I see where you're going with this.
Change the face of the label, change the face of the face it.
So, basically, the way we think about it, I think right now, as she was describing, as Sarah was describing, typically we always thought of when somebody said, oh, I'm an addict, we're thinking a junkie on the street who's dirty and who wants to admit that? No one does. No one would ever want to say, hey, because it's shameful. It's society has made it where it's shameful. Yet we don't typically think of addicts as somebody that's losing their home because they've gambled their life away or made bad investments with someone on Wall Street, or we don't. But these are typically as it's human nature to overdo something we enjoy. It's human nature, and I think we all have, as long as we all are continuously looking at it from a criminal way. And don't get me wrong, I salute your work. I truly I do, because that's tough in the position you would be in, to identify. And yes, labels play a huge role in that. But if in fact we find someone stealing at a mall, you're still breaking a law. Whether you're an addict or not, you're still breaking the law. Yes, she did her job, or whoever did their job. But once they go into the court, and there's different ways of dealing with that. So I don't think you are in fact the bad guy. I think you're just still doing your job.
No, I just need.
But so there's no specific way. It's just an addiction. I wouldn't call anyone a crack whore, but does society do that? Absolutely. And that's the reason why we still And this is the reason why we still treat people in such a way, because we look at it from a negative perspective rather than trying to help them heal.
Let's see. Chris, and then we'll get to Mark up there. And then we'll, go ahead.
Jamal, you said earlier in response to a question that the majority of heroin users do not begin as pill poppers.
Yes.
I always thought it was the other way around. I was under the impression, even in watching a recent 60 Minutes episode about this epidemic, that pill poppers eventually turn to heroin simply because they can't get the pills anymore, or the heroin is not as expensive as buying the pills off the street. But you're saying the majority of heroin users start as, I don't know, what they...
No. I think you didn't hear me right. I think a lot of people recently have started from pills, and they can no longer get them. That's why I mentioned, remember when the doctors picked up on it, they'll give you a NA pamphlet and say, have a good one.
All right, so I guess second to that question then is, do you see heroin users that were not originally pill pushers or pill poppers?
Yes, absolutely.
So how did they become heroin users?
That's a good question. So, being that in a lot of the poor communities, or I've seen, or because I come from, I was born in Britain, and I was around many, and I mean many. I lived in the projects. I walked out and I would see people smoking weed or drinking and partying. So once you party, you're opening up Pandora's box. You're gonna come across different people that have either ecstasy, so cocaine, crack. It doesn't matter. But at the time, if you're already within that partiness, behavior. I'm not saying partying is bad, please don't hate me, because it's good to socialize. But once you're already exposed to a drug and you're looking, again, to experiment with something else, most of them will do different things and then ultimately will turn into using heroin. Absolutely. But it's not always the case.
It's sort of environmental or relationship
Yes.
is what, so I was telling Jamali before I was a police officer, I was a therapist, okay, by training. So when I would be booking some people, they'd be under arrest for whatever, drugs would be often related to it. So I would think, whereas most of my counterparts are just booking them and getting through it, I'm asking, I was like, listen, this is off the record, but why? Why are you here? Like, why do you use drugs? And I would ask them. And a lot of women mostly would say that they got into a relationship in which a boyfriend or a friend was using. We're all responsible, I believe, for our own behavior. I am a true advocate for that. But I think a lot of this, and I don't know if Jamali would agree with me or if this is probably just piggybacking what you're saying, but it's the environment they're in or these relationships that they're in. They get exposed, and as a mom, that scares the heck out of me because, you hope your kids don't ever get involved in something like that. So, yeah, it's possible that they weren't popping pills or anything, but they ended up being around people who used, and I think they get introduced to it that way. And again, I would ask them, completely off the record, and I would, one of the times I will never forget, I was processing a woman for it was prostitution, and she was crying. I because of you, she's projecting onto me. I'm going to lose my children. DCF's going to find out about this, and blah blah blah. And I said to her, "How are you in this situation? At some point they've got to get to this low, right? They didn't start there." And I'd say, "How are you here?" And her story was a man that she got involved with, and he said, "Hey, just try this," and it wasn't heroin, but it just progressed into more and more and more. So,
All right, a couple more questions because I know we have to 2:35. Do we want to try and end it by class time? Okay, so I had Mark and then Naomi, and then I know I picked one.
Being as you went from Tunxis to methadone, how efficient do you believe methadone treatment is for people who are harder users? And what is the subculture response like when people are taking, or I guess seeking that help? I guess it may be two-sided depending on how
Absolutely.
they are and whatnot. But what is the subculture response to that too? You can answer that.
I don't really, because I was not on methadone to get off of heroin, I can't really speak to its success as a medication-assisted treatment. again, I know that it is a difficult drug to get off of if you are on that. I mean, you're slowly weaned off of that. But, you know, could you be a little more clear about like what you mean by the subculture?
Meaning like, are people, I mean, like I think you were.
I understand what you're saying. You're saying like some people look at it as trading one drug for another.
Yes.
So in reality, people hate me for it, but I'm a strong advocate for anything that helps. We've seen the success. We know methadone for years. And the way, actually in the book, to some of your classes, the way that methadone was introduced was for soldiers that were coming back from war. That's how we came across this miracle drug. So we know a lot about methadone. I'm a strong advocate for methadone. There, of course, just like anything else, people always find a way to abuse it because it goes back to the behavior. But yes, I know tremendous, like vast amount of people that have gotten their life together on methadone. Suboxone is more of a new drug. It's newer, so we still don't know the lasting effects, like 10, 20 years down the line. So I can't really give you too much on that. But methadone, I think that's another part. Society looks at it like, oh, we don't want that methadone clinic in our neighborhood. Well, it helps. And I think methadone along with treatment, with definitely therapy. Because there's always something that you revert to that drives us to go back to the drug. So therapy along with the methadone, I think, works wonders. You know, I've seen great success stories. People have gone back to work, but there's always a good and a bad side to things. So, yeah.
I would agree.
Go ahead.
You know, I also, I mean, I don't really share it, you know, it's like there are many people who are, you know, I come from a program of recovery that says abstinence only, and I don't agree with that necessarily. I think it's very much an individual thing. As she was saying, it's like people can get their lives back together if they have that, but it's like, you know, again, you need these other supports. If you're just saying, yeah, I'm gonna go and get my dose of methadone for the day, and that's all you're doing, I think maybe there's a bigger risk of saying, yeah, I'm not into this anymore. I'm gonna go back and do whatever I was doing before I get to the methadone clinic.
All right, I think we're about done. I'm sorry, I know other people want to ask some questions, but we probably should have done the class time. Do you want to make a final?
I just want to thank.
Can I just ask a quick question? We all raised our hands at the beginning, kind of when asked if we knew anyone that was actually an addict or had a relative and so forth and so on. As a community, just quickly, on campus, do we have a support system? If someone is seeking help for someone in their family or whatever, where can they reach out on campus?
Somebody want to take
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, you can contact the counseling office. We hook you up with any number of support systems. Seeking help through their family if they have it, and then organizations like yourself. Narcotics Anonymous or Gamblers Anonymous.
211.
211, that's what I was gonna say. I was biting my tongue, but 211 is a great resource for a lot of things.
We do have Narcan on campus as well. So one final mention, if you guys are interested in the drug war, drug policy, if you want one-stop shopping, this book, Chasing the Scream, which I would teach in my classes by Johan Hari, is excellent. Introduction to the topic is very readable. And I want to thank our panelists for coming.